Please rise for the jury. Please be seated. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen.
Good morning, sir.
Wait a little bit. We had some matters we need to address again outside of your presence, but we are otherwise ready to proceed. I just do want to remind you to continue to follow my instructions as I have previously given them to you. If at any point any of y'all need a break, again, just either just raise your hand or get Mr. Announcer or one of the deputies' attention or my attention, and we'll let you do so, okay? All righty. Would State please arraign the defendant?
Yes, Your Honor. May it please the court. In the name and by the authority of the state of Texas, the grand jury for the county of Hidalgo, state of Texas, duly selected, impaneled, sworn, charged, and organized as such at the January term, AD 2016, of the 332nd Judicial District Court for said county. Upon their oaths present and to said court at said term, that John Bernard Feit, hereinafter styled the defendant, on or about the 16th day of April, 1960, and before the presentment of this indictment in Hidalgo County, Texas, did then and there, with malice aforethought, cause the death of Irene Garza by asphyxiation in a manner and means unknown to the grand jury. Against the peace and dignity of the state of Texas, it is signed by the foreperson of the grand jury.
To which the defendant pleads.
Not guilty, Your Honor.
Thank you. You all may be seated. Does the state make an opening statement, sir?
Yes, we do. May I proceed?
Go right ahead, sir.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Please, the court. This is a case about betrayal, murder, and a cover-up. 1960 was a different place here in the valley. McAllen had about 30,000 people. Edinburgh had less than 20,000 people. And it was different, but a few things remained true. People still believed in values. They believed in hard work. They believed in morality. And they believed in their church. They trusted their church. You will learn that the church was a place where they socialized, where they worshiped, where they got married, and where they buried their loved ones. It was a different time. There weren't as many street lights. There weren't as many street signs. It was dark. It was rural. It was spotted with agriculture and orange groves throughout the community. It was a nice rural farming community that was starting to grow. We have to go back in time in this case, and we will take you there. In March of 1960, a young lady from Fronton, Texas, a little town outside of Rio Grande, was attending Pan American College. Her family had sent her here to live with a family in Edinburgh, Texas, and being a devout Catholic, between classes and after Catholic classes, she would oftentimes go to worship at her local Catholic church. On March 20th of that day, at about 4:30, she walked into Sacred Heart Church in Edinburgh, Texas. Right around the corner from here, an established church here in Edinburgh. And dressed in heels and a skirt, she walked up to the front of the altar, heels clicking across the tile floor, and knelt before what they call the confession rail, to say her prayers, to ask for forgiveness. And at that time, there was a man seated in the back of the church wearing khaki pants and a collared shirt. And as she prayed, that man came up behind her and with a cloth in his hand placed it over her mouth. He attempted to throw her onto the ground, and as she fell, one of his fingers went into her mouth and she bit it. She bit that finger so hard she tasted blood. That lady's name was America Guerra. Short time after that, maybe a week or a few days, there was another lady, also in her early 20s. She was a cook and the keeper of the rectory there at Sacred Heart Church in Edinburgh. What her responsibilities were to cook for the priests, to change their beds, to wash their clothes, to just tend to their needs. That was her job as a young lady. The rectory at Sacred Heart Church had a basement. And in that basement, they kept provisionals, they kept supplies, they kept groceries, foods, things that she would use to do her job every day. One of the younger priests would go by and visit the priests there. And on one occasion, as she was in the basement, he said, "How about if we make Tila disappear?" A short time after that, and after America Guerra had been attacked, that same lady, received a phone call. And on that phone, on the other end, was a voice that she recognized. And that voice told her, "Tila, you're next." Her name was Cleotilde Sanchez. And then, about a week or two before Holy Week, before the murder of Irene Garza, you were going to learn about a lady who was walking down the street, 20 years old. She lived a couple of blocks away from Sacred Heart Church in McAllen. And as she was walking to work in downtown McAllen, which she did every day, because it was close by, you're going to learn that a car pulled up. And in that car was a man, dressed like a priest. And he rolled down the window, leaned out, and said, "Hey, I'd like to take pictures of you in a black dress by the cemetery." Her name was Beatriz Garcia. And you're going to hear from all three of these ladies. And you're going to find out that the man who did this is John Feit. The same man that's accused of murder in this case. Tila Sanchez, Beatriz Garcia, and America Guerra were the lucky ones. They survived. Irene Garza was not. You're going to learn that Irene Garza grew up just like many of us did, in a household with a sister, with a mother and a father who were devout Catholics. You're going to learn that in 1960, Hispanic business owners were just starting to become popular. They were just starting to become educated, they were starting to own businesses, and they were starting to move. You will hear how her family owned a dry cleaner, and how they were able to move out of the area by Sacred Heart Church in Edinburgh and move into another area closer to Our Lady of Sorrows, where she worshiped. And as she grew up, you're going to know she had a normal childhood, with birthday parties, beauty pageants, high school where she was a twirler. And at that same time, or close to it, in Chicago, Illinois, there was another person. His name was John Bernard Feit. And at a young age, in his early teens, was sent to San Antonio, Texas, to an all-boys school, a seminary, if you will, to attend school there throughout junior high and high school, later years of junior high and high school. He also attended college there at an all-boys school and went into the seminary. You're going to learn that during this time, several years in this time, he was later ordained a Catholic priest. Their two paths would ultimately cross. You see, back in the day, there were two kinds of priests, and actually still today, and you're going to learn about that. There are what we call diocesan priests. You're going to learn that a diocesan priest is one who goes to their diocese and says, "I would like to become a priest." And the diocese sponsors them, sends them to school, often to college and into the seminary. And just like the military, after your education and you become ordained a priest, you serve that diocese. Our diocese down here is the Catholic Diocese of Brownsville. Priests that come from there can serve all throughout the valley, and diocesan priests belong to that diocese. The Brownsville Diocese didn't exist in 1960. It was the Diocese of Corpus Christi, run by a bishop named Garriga. And you will hear more about Bishop Garriga and his involvement in this case. You will also learn that there is a different kind of priest, and those are called religious orders. You will learn that you have the Jesuits who are committed to education. You have the Marianist brothers, who also have a university at St. Mary's. You will hear about the OMIs, the Order of Mary Immaculate, the Oblates, as we call them. The Oblate School of Theology is located in San Antonio, and that's a seminary of which John Feit attended. And the Oblates weren't just bound to work in a particular diocese. Well, like now, the valley had a shortage of priests. And during the high time for Catholics in the valley, which is Holy Week, they would often request priests from the different places, the different orders, in this particular case, from San Antonio, Texas, the Oblates. And you're going to learn that when priests did this, oftentimes they would move down here, they would enroll in the local university, and they would serve where they needed to serve throughout the valley. They would have a sponsoring priest who would tell them, you need to be here at this parish or here at this parish. They would stay at a place called the Pastoral House in San Juan, Texas. You're going to learn that this Pastoral House still exists, except now it's called the Basilica Hotel. It's a long rectangular building that's right by the shrine. You see, in 1960, you're going to learn the shrine didn't exist. It was a church, and eventually a plane crashed into that church, and later they built the basilica. And you will see through the maps that we will introduce into evidence that that area was open and barren, that the basilica had not been built, but that pastoral house still existed. And it was there, kind of in a dormitory situation, that John Feit and some other Oblate priests were housed. You're going to find out that after those three women were solicited, so to speak, and one who was attacked, you're going to find out that the Catholic Church, aware of what had happened in Edinburgh, Texas, moved John Feit from the pastoral house to Sacred Heart Church in the county. You see, Holy Week for Christians is perhaps the highest week. It is when Christians believe that Christ walked to his death, was crucified, and then rose 3 days after on Easter Sunday. And for Catholics, much like many faiths, they believe that before they could worship God in this most high of holidays, they needed to cleanse their souls. You're going to learn that even the Muslims do that before they pray. They feel that they need to be clean before they can enter into God's house. But you're also going to learn that in that time, times were different. People didn't go to church in shorts. They didn't go to church in jeans. They went to church dressed to see a king. And Irene Garza did that. Wearing a petticoat, wearing a skirt, wearing a blouse, wearing high-heeled shoes, and always wearing a veil. Because in those times, much like in the Jewish traditions and other traditions, the head needed to be covered, particularly the head of women. And they wore a veil. And on this particular night, when she was abducted and later murdered, she was wearing that veil. You're going to learn something very interesting about the Catholic Church, and that is a process that's called confession. It's a cleansing process that I just told you about, where Catholics believe that they need to rid themselves of sin before they can receive the body of Christ through the Holy Communion. And in that setting, they would go into a church. You're going to learn that oftentimes it's a room, 2 rooms actually, that has a small wall that divides it. And in the middle of that small wall is a little screen. It's kind of ornate, somewhat opaque. You can't really see through it unless you get real up close. The priest sits on one side of the room, and the penitent goes, or the parishioner goes, into the other side of the room. They kneel down, and they tell the priest their sins. It's private. It's confidential. The priest hears their sins and then gives them a penance. And through the power of God, as they are ordained a priest, they ask that God forgive their sins and they're cleansed. For Catholics, this process normally takes place on Saturdays. But you can do it at any time. And prior to Vatican II, prior to the Vatican II Council in the Catholic Church, this always took place in a private setting, in one of these confessions. Today, the rules have changed. Today, you can confess face to face. Back then, it wasn't like that unless you were on your deathbed. And you will learn about some of these traditions in the Catholic Church and how they play a role in this case. Irene Garza was a devout Catholic. Her family attended Sacred Heart Church in McAllen, Texas. That's where her dad attended church, and that's where she grew up and she made her sacraments. But as she got educated and became a teacher, and as her dad opened his dry cleaning business, they moved on to the other side of the tracks, where Our Lady of Sorrows Church now is in McAllen, and she began attending church there. We will hear from a man named Father McGettrick, who will tell you about Irene and her attendance at church and her dedication to a group called the Legion of Mary. The Legion of Mary was a group that provided social services to elderly, to people that were hungry, and they wanted to help their community. She was actively involved in that church, in that organization, with her god sister, Sylvia Acevedo Stern, who you will hear from, and with Don Moore. They were givers. They were true servants of God. Their religious director was Father Tom McGettrick. Irene desperately wanted to start a Legion of Mary at Sacred Heart Church as well. And as she attended both churches, most of the time Sacred Heart with her parents, she also attended OLS. Irene would go to confession quite often, and you're going to learn they actually made fun of her and said, "Irene, what do you have to confess about? You just went 3 days ago." But she liked going to confession, oftentimes taking her sister Josie with her, and her god sister, who you will hear from, Sylvia Stern. She had no fear of going into a confession. In fact, it brought her joy to do that. So on this particular week, she went to confession, and while she was in confession, you were going to learn that Father Feit was sitting on the other side of the door. And instead of sitting back and listening to her sins, he looked into the screen to see her face, exited his side of the confession, opened her side, pulled her out by her arm, and said, "You're too good to confess in here. Meet me in the rectory." This is going to become a trend that you will hear about, and a pattern that you will hear about throughout this case. Keeping in mind that prior to Vatican II, there were no face-to-face confessions. You will hear from Anna Maria Hollingsworth, who is going to tell you about that experience with Irene. But on this particular day, this particular Holy Week, Irene on Holy Saturday, with the church packed with everybody trying to cleanse their soul in this confessional, about 7 o'clock, walked in. She would never again be seen leaving that church. And the reason why is, and what we will prove to you is, that she was taken from that confessional and asked to go to the rectory. And it was in the rectory that you will learn that she was attacked by this man, John Feit, subdued and taken down to a basement where he held her there. He went back into the church. You will hear from witnesses who will tell you that his confession line was backed up because he wasn't in there. You will hear from a young man, and though he was educated, is now homeless. He was young at the time. Irene Garza was his second grade teacher. He remembers seeing Irene that day. He remembers that line backing up. But most importantly, he remembers that she left her purse on the church pew. So he picked that purse up and he says, "Mom, what do I do with this? This belongs to my teacher." And she says, "Take it over to the rectory. Maybe somebody there can hold it so that whoever's missing it, can find it." So he walks over in the dark of night to the rectory, which was just a short walk across. He knocks on the door, and the door cracks. He will describe to you a face that he will never forget. That face belonged to John Feit. He opened the door about this far, his hair messed up, looked kind of strange, you'll hear him say. He handed him the purse, said thank you, and shut the door. That purse, you will learn, will later be found thrown off the side of the road. You will also find out that after that, John Feit went back into the church and started hearing confessions again. And later exited about an hour later, asked the priest that was in charge there, hey, I need to borrow the keys to go to the pastoral house in San Juan. I've broken my glasses, and I don't think that I can keep going with these glasses that are broken. So I need to go to the pastoral house in San Juan. That priest gave him the keys, and he took off to San Juan. He came back a short time later, but it's what he did on that trip to San Juan that you will learn about, that we will talk about later. But during that time, he comes back, he says the High Mass, called the Vigil Mass, on Holy Saturday, stays there at Sacred Heart Church, wakes up in the morning, says the Easter Mass all day. Meanwhile, at the Garza residence, people are breaking down, people are crying, because Irene Garza has never stayed out past midnight. Her car was still seen at the church. Nobody had seen her exit that church. Her parents passed by and they said, well, she must be at the midnight mass. She must be at the vigil mass. She never returned. 4 a.m, her dad, broken-hearted, knowing he couldn't protect his daughter, starts calling the cops. My daughter is missing. 6 a.m, he starts calling the rectory. My daughter was at your church. Her car is still there. Where is she? You're going to learn that the family was in a hysteria. This was not like Irene. Where was she? They couldn't find her. You're going to hear from Alfredo Barrera, who's going to tell you that he was compadres with Nick Garza, and that he said, hey, we'll all get together. And all the friends and the compadres and the primos got together and they searched for Irene. Until one of them found a purse. They found it off of McCall Road by 495. A route that you were going to learn that people took to get to the shrine. And what's going to be hard to believe in this time travel that we're going to have to do back to 1960 is there was no expressway. It didn't exist back then. You'll see through the maps where they had already started to kind of carve it out, but it wasn't there. The main thoroughfare to get to the shrine, or the Basilica Hotel, or Pastoral House as it was called back then, was taking 495, which is Pecan, all the way to San Juan. It was a short right, and right there was the Basilica Hotel. That was the route. It's hard to believe, despite our knowledge that there was an expressway, but that's the route they took. As the search parties and the news media started looking for this missing teacher, a teacher who you will learn would buy school supplies for her students, a teacher that you will learn would give to the poor, they found something else. Sylvia Stern is going to tell you that she'll never forget that day. She was at an Easter party when she was called and told that Irene was missing. And like many families back then, without cell phones, they all went to Irene's house to comfort the family. And it was there that 18-year-old Sylvia Acevedo witnessed them bringing the purse and the devastation that it caused her parents, and then later finding a shoe. 1960, McAllen, like I told you, was an agricultural community. And in that community, you needed to get water down to the orange groves and into the cotton fields. And that water was transferred through a canal system. Some of us grew up swimming in those canals, but many times people would discard their trash there. There was a canal that ran from 2nd Street, and it's covered up now, all the way to North McAllen. And it was in that canal, 4 days later, on a Thursday, that they found Irene Garza's body floating. You're going to learn that she'd been dumped in the canal like a piece of trash, like a dog, a cat, still dressed in her petticoat. Her panties were missing, so was one of her stockings. She was bloated up, swollen, just as anybody that had been in the canal. So then the inquest began. It was at that time, you will learn, that Irene Garza said, "I think I know who the person was that attacked me." You're going to learn that John Feit became an immediate suspect. You're going to learn that the reason he was an immediate suspect was because the church and his superiors already knew that he had attacked Irene Garza. You're going to hear about a man named Joseph O'Brien. He was a priest. He was in charge of Sacred Heart Church. And he was the man who McAllen PD deputized. He would feed some information to the police. He would give some information to the Oblins. And that's how Joseph O'Brien worked. Information here, information there. Police started to question who the last person was to have seen Irene Garza. Her family wanted to talk to the priest who was the one who had last seen Irene Garza. You're going to learn that John Feit said, "Yeah, I saw her, but I told her that I didn't have," she wanted to confess here in the rectory, but I told her I had too many confessions to do, that she just needed to go to the church to confess. Then he changes his statement. In his next statement, he says, "Well, you know what? I did hear her confession at the church, at the rectory. She did give it to me there. That's because she wanted to talk to me about something private." And when he said this, not realizing that the authorities knew the rules of the Catholic Church and that face-to-face confessions weren't permissible, they began asking questions. They wanted to know where he was. You will learn that in his statements, his own admissions that he gave, that he said that he traveled back and forth between the church and the rectory 6 times. Excuse after excuse, needing clothes, needing glasses, whatever he could, but he went back between San Juan and McAllen 6 times in a car. You're going to hear from Medora Wooldridge. Miss Wooldridge was married to one of the few doctors here in McAllen, Texas, Dr. Dean Wooldridge. And it was on Easter Sunday that she's going to tell you that it had rained all day and that the rain had stopped. You see, Medora Wooldridge lived on the corner of Houston and 2nd Street, surrounded by orange groves, in a 2-story house with a sunroom and glass porch on the bottom. And it was around midnight, Easter Sunday, that her husband was called out on a house call. Remember, these were times where doctors still went to your home to tend to you. And that it was at that time, under the cover of dark, a canal about 100 feet from where she lived, that she heard a car pull up on that canal. She will tell you that she knows it's a car because there's no mistaking the sound of tires on gravel. And that car pulled up on that canal, and she heard a door open and a trunk open. She heard a very unusual sound, a sound of crinkling, perhaps tin or plastic or something. She can't really pinpoint it. But what she's going to tell you is she got a feeling that only she can describe, and other witnesses will tell you, a presence of evil, that something had happened. She's going to tell you about these sounds, and you will see pictures of the proximity of this location. She's also going to tell you that women didn't really speak out that much in those times, and that she got scared. She called another doctor and said, "Is my husband there?" That her husband came home and that she told him about what she had heard and that she was terrified. She's also going to tell you about a party that she was attending 4 days later, getting ready to go to the McAllen Junior League, when she heard that Irene Garza's body had appeared at a canal right across the street from where she was attending that party. She's going to tell you about that eerie feeling coming back again, and how she called her husband and reported to him what she had heard and what had happened, because she knew that what she had heard was a body being dumped. McAllen PD now had on their hands a murder. So what did they start to do? They canvassed the entire community, trying to find out, trying to find clues, taking statements from people. They also drained the canal. And in draining the canal, they found a very unusual object. What it was a viewfinder. Back in those times, people would take pictures and they would process them in the form of slides. And on those slides, you could put them on this viewfinder, plug it into the wall, and you could shine the image on the wall to see what the picture was. It was made by Kodak. It was blue. And it was intact. Wondering what it was, and perhaps a clue to this murder, they put it in the paper. Said, "This is what we found, who does it belong to?" Lo and behold, John Feit, in his own handwriting, you will learn, wrote a note saying, "That viewfinder belongs to me." They also found that at the corner of Medora Woolridge's house, where that canal was, they looked at it very carefully. Because remember, I had told you that it had been raining on that day, and you're going to hear about that rain. And you know when there's rain, you get mud. And when you get mud, you leave impressions. And it was at that location, you're going to find out, that they found an impression of a pattern that matched the petticoat of Irene Garza. The same pattern, the same weave, the same distance, with drag marks. The police then knew that that was where she had been dumped, and the evidence is going to show that that is what Medora Woolridge heard on that night. They still had no idea how this was going to happen. But meanwhile, America Guerra had come forward and said, "John Feit is the man that attacked me in that church, and I bit his finger." You're going to hear from witnesses who are going to tell you that they saw John Feit at Pan American College with bandages on his finger around that time. And of course, he gave several excuses for that. So a trial began, and eventually John Feit, in this very courtroom, seated in that seat right there, pled no contest to aggravated assault of America Guerra. You're going to learn that what had happened after that was he was only fined $500 and taken out of town. There was a story behind that. Because at that time, you're going to find out, the authorities were mostly Catholics. And the church was upset that a priest perhaps had already pled to an aggravated assault and now was being accused and the primary suspect in a murder. What were they going to do? You're going to learn throughout this case that Irene Garza went into a church trusting that her soul would be saved, but it was suffocated. You're going to learn about the institution who was in the business of seeking salvation for others, was complicit in covering up this murder. Because what happened, the evidence is going to show, is that they made a deal. John Feit pleads to the aggravated assault. We don't go forward on the Irene Garza case. We take him to a monastery where he will stay, and his punishment will be far greater than what the authorities can do. People accept it. You're going to learn that Nick Garza and Josephine Garza never did. And for all the times that they lived with a broken heart. You're going to learn about a man who attended church every single Sunday without fail, quit going to church. You're going to hear a mother who was so devastated, she didn't want to go to her own daughter's funeral. You're going to learn that the church that they trusted had betrayed them. But more importantly, you're going to learn that the authorities who were charged with enforcing the law had betrayed them as well. And the Irene Garza case went cold. Well, John Feit didn't go cold. The church held up one part of their bargain, and that is they moved him out of here. They moved him up to Dubuque, Iowa, to a monastery for monks. You're going to learn about the monastic life. You're going to hear about monks who go into a monastery, who take on a different name, who have no contact with the outside world, who try to disassociate themselves with their previous lives, who stay in prayer, who sleep on harp services, who often self-flagellate themselves to simulate Christ's suffering, but also who don't speak. It was a tough life. It was a life that they wanted to see if John Feit was fit for. And it was in Missouri, Nueva, Missouri in particular, at a Trappist monastery where a young monk named Dale Tashme, a man who you will hear from, was told by his superiors, John Feit is coming in. We need to see if he is fit to live in this monastery with us. You need to evaluate him and see if he is fit for this monastic life. And it was during that job interview, so to speak, process to determine whether he was fit for this type of life that John Feit told Dale Tashme how he killed Irene Garza. And what he said was he had taken her down to the basement and held her there. That he had placed her in a car and transferred her to San Juan, Texas. That he had gagged her or somehow impeded her breathing to the point that when he left her in a bathtub, in a secluded part of that pastoral house, that the last words that he heard from her was, "I can't breathe, I can't breathe." And he walked out, drove back to McAllen, and said Mass. When he returned, he found that she was dead. But during that time, he took it upon himself to fondle her breasts and later dump her body in a canal like a piece of trash. Dale Tashme kept this, passed it on to his superiors, and eventually John Feit was moved out of there. He moved to several places, and you're going to hear about the movement of people in the Catholic Church and why they tried to get them out of different communities and why they move them around in this case. But Dale Tashme kept this to himself, told his superiors about it, kept it to himself for many years. Dale Tashme left the priesthood. He got married. He had a family. And later on in life, he was asked by another priest who was writing a book about priests who had left the priesthood if he too would write about his experiences. And it was during this time that he disclosed that as a young monk, he had talked to John Feit during a discernment process, and he had learned that he had murdered a young lady in South Texas. The priest who was publishing the book said, "Hey, I don't know if I want to publish this. I think you need to go to the authorities." So that's exactly what Dale Tashme did. Dale Tashme didn't know where McAllen, Texas was. He thought it was in San Antonio, Texas. He thought it was in the same place that John Feit had gone to school. He thought it was perhaps in 1962, a different date, but he began doing his research. And you're going to learn that he looked and looked and looked and couldn't get any information about this young lady who had been murdered, dumped in a canal or a river or something. He couldn't find any information, so he called a gentleman named George Sadler. George Sadler was in charge of the cold case unit for San Antonio PD. And he talked to Mr. Sadler and he says, look, this is what I know. And so Sadler did his research and says, we don't have any murders or any unsolved cases dating back in 62 or 60 or 61 at that time that occurred here. But George Sadler was aware of a cold case unit that existed among the Texas Rangers. The Texas Rangers, you're going to learn, are the elite investigative group for the Texas Department of Public Safety. Been around for a long time, wear silver badges, 10-gallon hats, and big boots. So he called a guy named Rudy Jaramillo, an experienced Texas Ranger in charge of the cold case unit. And it was Ranger Jaramillo who said, wait a second, we've got a case down in McAllen, Texas that fits those exact facts. Happened during Holy Week, murdered on Easter, dumped in a canal. Let me talk to this guy. And so they put Dale Tashney and Rudy Jaramillo in touch. And you're going to hear about those conversations where Tashney was insistent that it happened in San Antonio, and Jaramillo says, well, we've got a case down here in McAllen. And as the facts bore out, it turned out that they were talking about the same person. You will learn that there is no mistaking who this person was. There was no mistaking about the travel. But most importantly, you're going to learn from his own statements, his own admissions, that the times matched exactly with what Dale Tashney had learned from John Feit. You're going to hear from other witnesses who are going to tell you that the handwriting on the note that he wrote on the slide viewer was his. That the petticoat impression that they found matched her petticoat impression. You're going to also hear about all the evidence being taken up and tested. But what you're going to learn is we didn't have the same investigative procedures then as we do now. You're going to see photograph an investigator holding a piece of evidence with a cigarette, half an inch long, not wearing any gloves. You're going to learn that we didn't know about cross-contamination back then, and that because a body had been sitting in water for 4 days, they were unable to collect any semen or any DNA or any type of trace evidence. You're also going to learn that some of the clothing had been washed. And you're going to find out who washed them. But as the case progresses, and as people were talked to and came forward, it became clear that on April 16, 1960, John Feit had murdered Irene Garza. It became clear, and the evidence will show, that he did it with a depraved heart bent on mischief. The evidence is going to show you, and we will prove to you, that he did this with malice of forethought. Our witnesses are old, and you are the sole judges of the credibility of whether they're telling you the truth or not. You will see the evidence come into this courtroom. You will see her purse. You will see her clothing. You will see her shoes. And you will hear about that and how it relates. Now, the judge has asked you to do so many things in this case. He's asked you to leave your families, leave your jobs, be here on time, don't talk about things, you can't research, you can't do this, you can't do that. But the one thing he did not tell you was to leave your common sense behind. He didn't tell you to check that in at the door. And it's with that common sense that we are going to prove to you that on that date, John Bernard Feit intentionally and knowingly, with malice aforethought, killed Irene Garza by asphyxiating her. Now, perhaps the most confused you will ever get is when you try to convince your heart or you try to convince your mind of what your heart knows is true. You use that common sense in your heart. And I ask each one of you to open the eyes of your heart and find John Feit guilty of murder. Thank you.
Mr. Flores, would you make an opening statement?
Yes, Your Honor, thank you. Good morning. Please. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. During the voir dire process, we talked a little bit about the difference between a story and facts. You were also advised during the voir dire process not to let bias, prejudice, and sympathy get in your way as jurors of being judges of the facts. Many times over the course of the last 45 minutes, we've heard stories about monastic life. We heard stories about what it was to be a priest. We heard stories about rural McAllen, Texas, and what it was like to be a Catholic at Sacred Heart Church in McAllen in April of 1960. Those are stories. You as jurors will not be called upon to believe a story. You as jurors are being called upon to make findings of facts. And the facts in this case, as you will see and hear from the evidence, are these. Number one, there was no witness to see John Feit together with Irene Garza on April the 16th of 1960. There are several witnesses who see Irene Garza on the campus of Sacred Heart Church throughout the evening. At times when the state's evidence would suggest to you that she was in the basement of the rectory at Sacred Heart Church. I expect Dale Tashley to try to convince you through his testimony that John Feit accosted Miss Irene Garza, stuffed her in the basement, and then went across to the church to hear confessions. As you heard Mr. Garza tell you, she was never to be seen again. Over the course of the investigation, the investigators did indeed speak with people who saw her up to an hour and a half, perhaps even 2 hours later. Those are facts that you will have to find as a jury. You will determine whether that's true or it's not true. When we talked in voir dire, I asked you, can you take the testimony of an individual and compare it to other evidence you see in the case? Are you going to listen to someone talk and just believe automatically what they tell you? Dale Tashley. I think the evidence will show you that Mr. Tashley did not know any of the facts that he told George Savior or that he told Rudy Jaramillo until after he employed several people to do an investigation for him. He'll tell you that. He'll admit it to you. He'll admit to you he didn't know when. He'll admit to you that he didn't know where. The evidence will tell you he made assumptions about what happened that night. He made assumptions. The evidence will show that he told investigators John Feit said this, but he will admit to you that he made an assumption. Now you might ask yourself, will the evidence tell us why Dale Tashley is telling these things? You'll also hear that Dale Tashley was invited to write a book. Prosperity, opportunity, those are the facts you will hear about. As jurors, I will call upon you to listen to that evidence and make those facts. Medora Woolbridge will be here. She will tell you what she heard. It's up to you to decide from the facts whether there was evil present. Remember what I told you, the difference between a story and a fact. I think the evidence will show you on that particular evening in that mud, they not only got an impression of a petticoat, but they got an impression of a footprint. And the evidence will show you that that footprint was not John Feit's. The evidence will show you that there isn't any forensic evidence whatsoever collected then or now that affirmatively linked John Feit to this crime in any way. Now, as a juror, you may say to yourself, well, Mr. Garza's right. The evidence will show me that back in 1960, we didn't have the opportunity to collect DNA. That's not your job as jurors. Your job as jurors is to find evidence. Is there any evidence of DNA? The evidence will show you no. Is there any evidence of fingerprints? The evidence will show you no. Is there any eyewitness testimony? The evidence will show you no. Those are findings of facts which you as jurors will have to make. And I disagree with Mr. Garza. The findings of facts that you make may hurt your heart. And while I too ask you to bring your common sense into the courtroom, do not let your heart make those findings. It's a tragic case. The loss of life. Garza, as I'm sure you will hear through the evidence, was a wonderful person who did not deserve to die the way that she did. Equally tragic is to allow your heart to make the findings of facts in this case. You won't hear evidence of corruption. What you will hear is lack of probable cause. When you ask yourselves, as the evidence comes in and leaves the courtroom, why wasn't he arrested? The evidence will show you they didn't have enough evidence. The testimony, the physical evidence, the photographic testimony, the photographic evidence, all of that will lead you to one conclusion. There wasn't enough. The evidence will convince you that they canvassed all of McAllen for years. And again, in 2002, you'll hear investigation ramped up again. Yet no law enforcement agency believed they had enough probable cause to submit an arrest warrant. There wasn't enough evidence then. There won't be enough evidence now. I ask you as finders of fact to listen to the testimony, receive the evidence, and find the facts. And I think once you do that, you will be convinced that John Bernard Feit is not guilty. And this case can be finally put to rest.